If you had lived in that era, you probably would have died long before reading these words. Not because of war, not because of wild beasts. The most common reason your ancestors didn't live to be the age you are today was much simpler and far more brutal. It is often said that the average life expectancy of ancient humans was only about 30 years. That number is correct, but it is telling you a half-truth. And the other half is what completely changes how you view the past. The statistical illusion. Let's start with that exact number, as this is where the biggest misunderstanding occurs. When demographers calculate the average life expectancy at birth of an ancient society, they don't mean that most adults died at age 30. The average is dragged down drastically by a single factor: infant and child mortality rates. Anthropologist Rachel Kaspari, along with colleague Sang-Hee Lee, published a study analyzing the dental fossils of hundreds of hominins and ancient humans to estimate their age at death. Their research revealed something crucial. If a person survived the perilous stage of childhood, the chances of living into late adulthood, and even old age, were very real. In other words, simple math is deceiving your intuition. If half the children in a community die before the age of 5, and the other half live to be 70, the average life expectancy still calculates to roughly 35. No one actually lives to that average number. It is a statistical illusion, not a biological reality. So the real question isn't, why did ancient humans die at 30? The right question is, why did so many children fail to survive their early years? And what killed the vast majority of those who didn't make it past that stage? The real causes of early death. 1. Infection and disease. The first, and biggest, answer is infection and disease not being eaten by wild animals as movies often depict. In a world without antibiotics, vaccines, or an understanding of bacteria, a minor skin wound could become a slow death sentence. A scratch from climbing a tree, a cut from crafting stone tools, an abscessed tooth, all had the potential to lead to sepsis that the body had no way to fight other than its own natural immune system. Paleopathologists, studying ancient remains, often find signs of chronic infections on bones, evidence that many individuals lived with pain and infection for a long time before their bodies finally gave out. Diarrhea, which today for most people living in developed countries is merely a day of discomfort, was once one of the leading causes of death in young children throughout most of human history. Due to severe dehydration, with no electrolyte solutions or IV fluids, a child could die in just a few days from an intestinal infection that today would be treated with a simple course of antibiotics. 2. Childbirth. The second factor, less talked about but incredibly important, is childbirth itself. As analyzed in many anthropological studies, human bipedalism narrowed the pelvis, while fetal brain size grew increasingly larger through evolution. This created a true anatomical conflict, making human childbirth more dangerous than for most other mammals. In an environment devoid of modern medical intervention, safe cesarean sections, or drugs to control postpartum hemorrhage, both mother and child faced high risks of mortality at the very moment life began. Maternal death was not a rare tragedy. It was a constant fixture, deeply ingrained in the consciousness of all pre-modern communities. 3. Seasonal starvation. The third factor is seasonal starvation, something most people living in modern societies never have to face on a regular basis. Anthropologist Richard Lee, in his famous study of the Jew, Hoansi people in the Kalahari, noted that while hunter-gatherer communities had enough food most of the time, there were still periods of seasonal scarcity, especially at the end of the dry season when water and edible plants became rare. For a healthy adult, a brief period of undernourishment could be endured. But for infants, young children, pregnant women, or the elderly, that same period of starvation could be the deciding factor between life and death, especially as a weakened body reduces its ability to fight off disease. A glimpse into the past. Let's recreate a specific scenario, because abstract numbers and concepts cannot fully convey the true weight of this. You are a mother in a small band of about 25 people, living 40,000 years ago. You have given birth to 5 children. 2 of them died before they could walk, one from a high, unexplained fever that lasted for days, the other from severe diarrhea after eating something unclean during the season of food scarcity. You are no stranger to burying a child, nor are you a stranger to hope, for your 3 remaining children are alive, healthy, learning how to find water, learning how to identify which fruits are edible, and learning how to survive exactly as you were taught. This was not a life steeped in constant mourning, even though loss was an unavoidable part of it. It was a life where humans learned to carry both grief and hope simultaneously, because there was no other choice. The grandmother hypothesis and the value of old age. Now for the part that surprises many the most, the thing that completely overturns the popular image of ancient humans' low life expectancy. If a person made it through the risky stage of childhood, avoided common diseases that caused early death, and survived childbirth if they were a woman, the chance of living into old age was not unusual at all. The research by Kaspari and Lee, mentioned earlier, found that the proportion of people living to an age considered grandparents, meaning old enough to help raise a third generation, increased significantly during the evolutionary phase of modern humans compared to earlier ancestors. This suggests that the longevity of the elderly was not a random phenomenon, but may have played a crucial role in the evolutionary success of humans, as the elderly carried survival knowledge accumulated over decades. The role of these elders was not merely symbolic. They were the only ones in the community who remembered the worst drought that happened 30 years ago and how the group survived it. They were the ones who remembered exactly which plants could be used as medicine to lower a fever. They were the ones with enough experience to recognize the early signs of an approaching harsh winter, based on a lifetime of accumulated observations that a younger person simply hadn't had the time to learn. This is the crux of a concept anthropologists call the grandmother hypothesis, proposed by anthropologist Kristen Hawkes and colleagues based on research on the Hadza people in Tanzania. This hypothesis argues that women past their reproductive years are not merely living on in a biologically meaningless way. They play an active role in foraging, caregiving, and passing on knowledge to descendants, thereby increasing the survival chances of the extended family. Old age, in this context, was not a neglected burden in ancient societies. It was a strategic resource. Why the misconception persists. So if old age wasn't unusual, why is the popular image of ancient humans dying young so deeply ingrained in the minds of most of us? Part of the reason lies in how the average number is misunderstood, as explained at the beginning of this video. But another part is that archaeological studies, especially in the early stages of the field, tended to discover and analyze the remains of those who died at younger ages more frequently. This is partly because older people's bones are often more brittle and decay more easily over time, leading to poorer preservation at archaeological sites, and sometimes they were aged incorrectly based on older analytical methods. As methods for determining age through skeletal remains improved, particularly more accurate techniques analyzing tooth wear and bone density, researchers began to realize that the number of individuals living to old age in many ancient communities had been significantly underestimated in previous studies. What this means for us today. So what does this mean for you, someone living in an era with vaccines, antibiotics, clean water, and an emergency room just a few calls away? The spectacular increase in average life expectancy over the last 2 centuries, from about 30 or 40 years up to over 70 years in many countries, does not primarily come from modern humans living longer than their ancestors' inherent biological capacity. It comes primarily from the elimination of the causes of early death, especially in young children. Vaccines, clean water, medical hygiene, and antibiotics do not magically extend human old age. They simply help more people survive long enough to reach the age that the human body, fundamentally, has always been capable of reaching. In other words, your genome hasn't changed much compared to a person living 40,000 years ago. The biological capacity to live to 70 or 80 years old has always existed within the human species. What has changed is the environment surrounding that capacity, the removal of the barriers that once killed so many people before they had the chance to realize their full biological potential. Your ancestors were not physically weaker than you. They just lived in a world where every minor scratch, every fever, every childbirth was a roll of the dice, with risks far higher than what you face today. If you had lived in that era, you probably wouldn't be here to read these words, not because your body lacked the ability to survive into old age, but because the gap between birth and adulthood, in that world, was a much narrower path than the one you have walked, without even realizing how much you were protected.